log in. Just wanted to say good afternoon and thank you for joining us for the YANA webinar on innovation in social enterprise, today with Rabbi and entrepreneur Elan Babchuck. Before I introduce Elan, I'd like to say a few words about YANA. YANA, the Yale Alumni Nonprofit Alliance, is an open, welcoming, volunteer-led organization that brings programming like our webinar series to the public at no or a very reduced cost. We do rely on the financial support of our members and our donors. So if you like our programs and wish to see them continue, we'd ask that you make a minimum donation or join YANA as a paid member at the very reasonable rate of about $5 a month. And as my colleague Grace likes to say, that's about the price of a latte in New York. You can also sponsor a webinar or any of our other programs. So for more information, you can go to our website, www.yalenonprofitalliance.org, for more information and for links to our donationship and membership pages. Especially, you also should have received in your mail this morning a letter from our founder and chair, Ken Inadomi, launching our March fundraising campaign for the YANA Dwight Hall Summer Fellowship Program. We provide the funding for students who have already obtained or are looking to obtain internships, usually through postings at Yale or otherwise. We hope everyone will contribute towards helping these very talented and ambitious students, yet they are under-resourced. We want to help them pursue these summer positions in social impact, and these are ones they otherwise really wouldn't be able to afford to take if it wasn't for our funding. So more information on the fellowship can also be found on our website. So speaking of being in the social impact space, I'd like to turn now to our program and our guest speaker, Elan Babchuck, is Rabbi and an MBA. Elan is an ordained rabbi and an entrepreneur. He is engaging, intellectual, and wise beyond his years. I think you'll really enjoy his presentation. Elan left the pulpit several years ago to found Glean Network, an incubator and network for entrepreneurs who are building new ventures and communities in light of their faith. He's also the director of innovation at Clal, which is the Center for Leadership and Learning based in New York City and in Providence, Rhode Island, a think tank focused on the future of faith in America. He's given TEDx talks on the future of religion in America, and he's sought for his wit, intelligence, and creative guidance. Elan will speak for about 40 minutes, and then we'll have time for Q&A. You can submit your questions at any time through the Q&A button on your website on the Zoom page. I will monitor that, and if there's something I think is particularly important to raise, I will let Elan know. Otherwise, we'll send time for that at the end. So without further ado, I'm going to switch it over to Elan to be our host. And 1 second. All right, Elan.
Okay, can everybody hear me okay? Oh, actually, I guess I won't be able to hear anybody else, so. Okay, and Rachel, you're muted now too, so if you can unmute yourself, tell me. First of all, thank you so much. That was by far the most gracious introduction that I've ever heard. Wit and wise and all of those wonderful things. And oh, great, Marilyn, thank you for letting me know. And I'll simply say that I hope to someday live up to an introduction like that. But in the meantime, I'm very much looking forward to spending this next, let's say 56 minutes together and hopefully do some learning. And the other thing I'll say, just by way of sort of setting the table, is first of all, I come in Providence, Rhode Island, $5 can buy you a lot more than a latte. But certainly I think being a part of YANA is, the value is absolutely there. And I know, having worked with Rachel and known Rachel for a number of years, that there's just an immense amount of value, and $5 is very little to pay for that. The other thing that I'd love to say is that please be live in the chat. And I don't know, the chat function, the Q&A function, Rachel can give you some guidance on what's the best mode of engaging, but I love to be interrupted, and I really, really love to learn from the group as we kind of go through a couple of different topics today. So please don't hesitate to chat, Q&A, and I'd love to stop it and pause at any point. And certainly we'll have time at the end of it also for a more formal Q&A setting, but I don't want you to hold on your questions for too long. So please feel free to interrupt. In a moment, I'm going to switch over to a couple of slides so that we can kind of work through there are three different lenses and tools that I'm going to introduce today that I have found really illuminating in the work of social entrepreneurship. I have been involved in entrepreneurship for about 20 years and really started as a social entrepreneur, kind of looking for the gaps in the world around me, and very much inspired by my own story to find ways to make change, sustainable change, impactful change, and real change in local communities, and now focusing certainly beyond my own localities. So we're going to go through 3 different tools later on. I'll walk through each of them individually, but I thought I might just tell you a little bit about why I do what I do. Rachel mentioned earlier that I left the pulpit in 2016, and I want to tell you a little bit about why. There's an old story. I think every culture has a different version of the same story, but as I was told this story, there are these 2 rabbis that are walking alongside a river, and they see that their bodies floating down the river, and they're both completely horrified and immediately called to act, to do something about it. Oh my God, people are drowning in the river and we're right here. We have to do something. We have to do something. But they go in different directions. So one rabbi runs to the river right where they are and starts pulling people out one at a time. Oh my God, we've got to save these people, and trying to resuscitate them. And looks behind him, horrified to find that the other rabbi didn't follow suit. The other one's not, what do you mean? We have to save these people. Why aren't you coming with me? And then he looks up and sees in the distance that the other rabbi is actually running upstream and running away from this first rabbi who went in to save everybody in the river. And later when they reconvene, this first rabbi who went right to the river says, why did you go upstream? And the other rabbi said, well, I wanted to go to the head of the river to find out why people are falling in the first place, and maybe to create some systemic solution. And this is the subtext, to create some systemic solutions to stop people from falling in the river in the first place. And so that was actually a story told to me by my own rabbi many moons ago. I must have been 5 or 6 years old when I first heard that there are many modes of change in the world, but if you can have systemic impact, if you can solve a problem that is felt and experienced across multiple domains, across multiple sectors and identities, and if you can find a way to create a solution to stop people from falling in the first place, well then you've really left your mark, and that you've really left the world better than it was when you found it. And for me personally, that's my North Star, is leaving the world better than it was when I found it. So when I started working in the pulpit in 2012, I became ordained and got my MBA in 2012, and started working at a wonderful synagogue in Providence, Rhode Island. And simultaneously, actually about 6 months after I was ordained, there was a study that was released about what was happening in American religion. That the study found that increasingly people are leaving en masse. Everyone is leaving American religion, and they're de-affiliating. There's a quote from Robert Putnam that I'll share a little bit later on, but then I read American Grace, which was an amazing book that Robert Putnam wrote about this pattern of disaffiliation from institutional religion. And now, we're now in 2019. So roughly since 2011, there's been on average 4,000 to 10,000 houses of worship have closed every single year in America. Between 4,000 and 10,000 houses of worship closed every single year in America. And I was feeling that strain inside of this one institution, this one synagogue. I'm noticing patterns of disaffiliation. I'm feeling like there's maybe a mismatch between the value proposition, between what it is that we're trying to introduce into people's lives, or the practices that we're trying to welcome them into, and what the lived experience of the folks that we were trying to engage actually was out in the world, that there was a mismatch. And I used a lot of design thinking and community organizing in my work in that institution. And we were able to engage folks in I think a deeper way, and solve real problems for them and help them make the progress in their lives that they really wanted to. But in 2016 felt increasingly called to go up the river, to try to see if there are some systemic issues, some broader mismatches, more so than just keeping religion in business for the sake of keeping religion in business, but because I truly believe that that living in community has value in and of itself. I truly believe that living a life of service, as I've committed my own life to do, has a value of serving others in the world. And I truly believe that there are there's an incredible amount of value inside of that is currently sort of locked inside of the religious world that can be unleashed to serve the broader world and to solve real problems in the world. So to put that in context, yes, somewhere between 4,000 and 10,000 houses of worship close every year, but religion is still the third largest industry in America. At $1.2 trillion, it's the third largest industry in America. Its annual revenue is larger than the top 10 tech companies combined. And there are still 344,000 congregations in America that are trying to find their way. And so amidst this shifting landscape and this generational shift that we're experiencing, there's also immense opportunity. And so what I do now, I'll talk about a little bit later on, is support faith leaders who are really reimagining the role of faith, the delivery system of faith, and the way that we serve the world around us today. So with all of that, I'm going to begin to share the slides, and someone will chat me and tell me if they're having any trouble seeing them once I start doing that. So here we go. Okay, and here I have to press play. Okay, so I'm gonna look out for any chats. Or Rachel, since you're the only video that I can see, you can tell me, are you able to see the slides? Okay, so this is now officially the YANA webinar series, and that's the opening slide. I wanna actually begin, as I have done, by telling you a little bit more about me, and not just what I do. I think coming from the East Coast, we often, oh wait, how do I go back to doing this? I think we often start with the question of what do you do? And really that means what do you do for work? But one of the takeaways that I hope you'll walk away with from this webinar is that it is a reinforcement of the idea that people are holistic human beings, that everybody wears many different hats in their lives. And I think especially in this moment of time, folks really want to bring their whole selves into their work, into their lives, into every facet of their lives, rather than have sort of a parsed identity where you're one person in one place and another person in another. And more importantly, in our work in the nonprofit sector to serve people, we also need to understand, and I saw in the questionnaire, the responses to the questions that went out earlier, that for those who are you're looking to recruit more members or better teachers at your charter school or raise more money from your donors, what's so important is to understand, as I'm sure you already do, that they are more than just donors. They are more than just teachers. They are more than just members. Every one of them has a whole set of identities that they bring with them. And so with that, I introduce myself as a rock climber, a chef, a gardener, an entrepreneur for 20 years. I've founded 5 different social enterprises, some that have become nonprofit organizations as well, and a 5th generation rabbi, and that's my family. And I see there's some questions, hands being raised, and I'll invite Rachel to take a look at that and tell me if you want me to stop at any point. And now I'll tell you what I do at work, which is that I work with faith leaders who are taking it upon themselves to reimagine the role of religion in America today and tomorrow. I've run 3 different fellowships with my team. One of them, we have a partnership with Ashoka, and we're working inside of seminaries where we're training faith leaders on change-making skills, on innovation and design thinking. Another is a partnership with Columbia Business School, where we train emergent faith leaders, folks who have been out of school already and are serving, who are building new social impact ventures. And the third is a project called Spark, where we work with leadership teams at existing institutions and kind of use the IDEO model of innovation and entrepreneurship beginning with human-centered design. This is the quote I was talking about before. It's impossible to exaggerate what a historical change, disaffiliation from institutional religion is, that this trend actually has the potential for completely transforming American society. And that's why you'll find me upstream trying to figure out not only why all of this is happening, but where there is opportunity to embrace the change rather than try to fight against it. So the agenda today, if you fall asleep for the next 40 minutes, the only takeaway that you walk away from from this entire thing is that if you as an organizational leader, if you want your organization to grow, don't worry so much about who isn't showing up. We often do, we think the answer to our strategies, we need better branding, we need better marketing, we have to recruit the people who aren't coming, and we have to, that's how we're gonna grow. But we can actually learn so much by better understanding our existing constituents, that actually they hold the key to better understanding how to serve new people. You start with the people that you already have in the door. And the three theories that we're going to focus on, one is jobs to be done. That's a theory developed by my friend Bob Mesta, who works at the Christensen Institute, Clayton Christensen, and he's also the founder of the Rewired Group out of Detroit. The second is something called the competing pressures behavioral statement. That's developed by someone named Matt Waller. We'll talk about him later. He's also wonderful. And the third is why you should follow the rule breakers. And the tool there is Bright Spots. And for those who have read Chip and Dan Heath's book, Switch, you'll recognize the concept of positive deviance and bright spots. And that was first developed by Monique and Jerry Sternin on the heels of their work with Save the Children in Vietnam in 1990. And then we'll have time for Q&A. And Rachel's gonna hold me accountable on time because I really wanna hear questions. And if there are any questions that have already come through, Rachel, that you see, feel free to let me know. Okay, so the real question we need to be asking is, what do people really want? You know, if you're whether you're a development officer or you're a CEO or you're, I think there are a number of folks who are in the philanthropic sector and are trying to figure out how to maximize their grant-making capacity or the capacity of the organizations that they're giving grants to. And at the core of all of this is trying to figure out what people actually want. We have our hypotheses, we put things out on the wall. Sometimes it's just wet spaghetti and we see what sticks. But I think at the heart of every successful innovation, because I know we're talking about innovation in social enterprise, at the heart of every successful innovation is not the story of the person who's, you know, in the shower and the light bulb goes off, or the person who's, you know, tinkering in the garage and comes up with a brilliant idea. If the idea is not based on what people actually are yearning for, then it is very likely to fail. If it is assuming or projecting needs and wants and hopes onto people without actually first validating that those things exist and that the people you're trying to serve experience those things, there's a good chance of failure with whatever the innovation is. And by the way, I think that's also one of the disservices that sort of the general public experience, among many other disservices coming from Silicon Valley. But one of the disservices from the narratives out of Silicon Valley are that it's the innovation becomes the hero of the story, but it's actually the people. It's all based on having a better understanding of the people you're trying to serve, whether you're trying to sell them something, recruit them for something, engage them in certain ways. It's all about understanding what they actually want. So I'm going to open up with the Milkshake Story. This is, again, this is my friend Bob Mesta. He's on the left. And Bob is, for those of you who have ever had a rental car and you have to fill up the gas when you're on your way back to the airport, and you're thinking, what side is the gas tank on? Now, maybe some of you in the audience already know, there's a little arrow next to the gas gauge that points left or right. Now, Bob invented that among 3,700 other inventions. That's like Bob's lasting legacy in the world. He's the one who came up with that. But here, I'm going to tell a story about him with regard to milkshakes. So many years ago, Clayton Christensen's firm, Clayton Christensen is the author of The Innovator's Dilemma. He developed a theory called disruptive innovation theory, Harvard business professor. And his firm was hired by McDonald's to figure out why not more people were buying their milkshakes. So the first firm, before Christensen's firm came in, they sent out a bunch of surveys. They did customer feedback, group tastings. They went through all of these different modes of trying to understand how to sell more milkshakes. And as with surveys, if you've ever done an organizational survey, they got answers all across the board. I want a milkshake that's more chocolatey. I want one that's chunkier. I want one that's fruitier. I want one that's less caloric. I want one that's more caloric, bigger, smaller. And they messed with all the variables and nothing got sold. They did not sell one more milkshake than they had previously. So McDonald's fired that firm and they came to the Christensen firm. They said, all right, you've got this sort of emerging theory called jobs to be done theory. See what happens. Try it out and see if we can sell more milkshakes. Great. I think it was Bob Mesta actually was the person who went and did this, stood in the McDonald's parking lot from 6 a.m. to 12 p.m. To 12 a.m. for 18 hours and tracked every single person who came out with a milkshake. What were they wearing? What kind of car did they get into? Did they buy anything else? Did they have the milkshake and stay in the restaurant? Did they take it to go? What time? What size was the milkshake, et cetera. And then they tracked all the statistics. Then the next day he came back 6 a.m. and every time someone came out with a milkshake, they would stop them in the parking lot on the way to the car and they would say, excuse me, what job did you hire that milkshake to do? And then of course, like you imagine yourself, it's like 6:30 in the morning, you just bought a milkshake at McDonald's and some weird guy comes to you in the parking lot and says, what job did you hire your milkshake to do? You immediately try to walk the other direction or say like, get away from me. And so they realized, okay, that's not a good question. Let me try to get to the bottom. So, okay, tell me about when did you first think about buying that milkshake? Tell me about, okay, the last time you had that same feeling, what did you get instead of the milkshake? And ultimately, by asking a series of these questions that sort of walked through the entire timeline of when they first thought about getting a milkshake to when they bought the milkshake to when they finished the milkshake, they understood that about 50% of the milkshakes were bought for the same reason. So the folks, when they started answering that question, they said, well, one time I got a bagel, but like I have a long commute and you have to spread the cream cheese on the bagel and I only have two hands and I couldn't drive while I did. Okay. Another person, well, I bought it. Sometimes I get a Snickers bar, but then I feel guilty. Okay. And then sometimes I ate a banana, but I'm hungry by 7:30 already. And asking a series of these questions, what other solutions you had to this problem that arose in your life such that you bought a milkshake, they understood that about 50% of the people who were buying milkshakes were doing it in the first hour that McDonald's was open. And they had about a 45 to 60-minute commute alone. And what they came to understand was that people actually were buying the milkshake and they would always get a large. They were buying the milkshake to have company on the ride. That they have a 45 to 60-minute boring commute. So not only is there the functional component of what the milkshake does, which is fill you up, right? But there's a social and emotional aspect to selling a milkshake, which is crazy. No one would ever think that there's a social and emotional component to having a milkshake, but of course there is. So and then the other subset of people were parents during the 45 minutes after school pickup who just wanted a small milkshake for their kids to tide them over until dinner. So there were really two jobs to be done, two different distinct categories. And then what they were able to do is understand that it's not about how chocolatey the milkshake is or how fruity or how caloric or anything, that the only variable that actually mattered for that first group was how thick the milkshake was, because it has to last for 45 to 60 minutes. So they tweaked the thickness. They realized that they're not buying multiple things, they're only buying the milkshake. So they moved the place where you buy the milkshakes to a separate line so you don't have to stand in line. So why does this matter? Because by the time they were done tweaking these variables on the milkshakes, they sold 7 times the number of milkshakes, because they got to understand more about the emotional place in someone's life that the milkshake was filling. So what Peter Drucker says is the customer rarely buys what the company thinks it's selling. That we might think we're just in the milkshake business, or you might think you're in the development business, or you might think you're in the charter school business. There's always something deeper. There's a deeper yearning and deeper needs that people have. And the best way to uncover them through this theory is through a set of interview questions. So let me tell you about that. Again, this is a definition of jobs to be done is it's the process a consumer goes through whenever she aims to transform her existing life situation into a preferred one, but she can't because there are constraints that stop her. So going back to this milkshake story, the person doesn't want to feel lonely on their commute. It's that simple. And so how do we help them feel not lonely or feel accompanied on that commute? Well, you give them something to do. And that's what they were hiring the milkshakes to do. Now, obviously, in social enterprise, we're thinking about much bigger questions, right? We're talking about having social impact or solving social ills or healing people. There are so many different ends that we're really focusing on, which to talk about a milkshake might feel trite, but to use it as an example to understand that there are many, many layers to people's yearnings is, I think, a critical lens into this work. I'm going to skip this. This is something called the four forces diagram, which I don't want to get too deep into, but I'm leaving it here so that when you take a look at the slides later, you'll have access to it. There are 4 principles to jobs to be done. The first is that jobs aren't just tasks, they involve experiences. So it's more than just selling a product, it's all of the experiential elements around that. So when you think about, let's say if you're in development and you're raising money might be the key end point for the work that you're doing, but you think about all of the ways that you make that person, that donor, feel known and feel stewarded and feel acknowledged and feel thanked throughout the entire process. It's not just that one transaction, it's the entire experience. When creating something for people, you have to understand that the circumstances of their lives are more important than certain characteristics. So you might break people down based on their age demographic or their income bracket or other identity-based, parsing of their identities, but actually thinking more about the characteristics of their lives, about how they live their lives, might actually give you better insight and a better ability to hone what you do to serve that particular constituency. The third is that good innovations solve problems that had poor solutions or none at all. And the problems that we're seeking to solve are timeless, but the solutions are not. And then finally, as I already mentioned, the jobs have 3 components: the social, emotional, and functional components. Again, jobs to be done tells you what business you're actually in. It helps you understand what's getting in the way for the people that you're trying to serve, what's stopping them from engaging with what it is that you're trying to bring them along into. And this, I think, is actually the most important, that by doing these jobs to be done interviews, it's about a 40-minute interview per person, that it helps you understand constituents, but it makes them feel known. There's a great book that came out recently called The Four. It's about Amazon, Apple, Google, and Facebook. And one of the sort of theories that it posits is that the reason why their market cap has grown so much, the most important asset that these 4 companies have is not their intellectual property, but it's the data. It's the amount of information they have about each and every one of us. And the reason why that data is so valuable is because if you think about the experience when you sign into Amazon, right? It might say, hey, Elan, did you like that book you just bought? Oh, by the way, once you tell us about what you thought of the book, here are 5 other books that you might also like. And you sign into Facebook and, hey, Elan, it's Joey's birthday today. Wish him a happy birthday. And by the way, like, remember this beautiful thing that happened a year ago and the picture that you posted with you and your kids and your wife? Wasn't that beautiful? And do you want to share it with your friends? And don't forget, your anniversary is next week. Facebook knows so much about you, and it uses it in such a way to make you feel known, that when you walk into that space or you click into that space, they make you feel known. Jobs to be done can do the same thing. There's no algorithm for it. There's no AI or machine learning that you can apply to this. It's about going back to the basics of sitting down knee to knee across from somebody for 45 minutes and trying to better understand how they live their lives And not only will that give you insight into how you can better serve them, but it also helps them feel known along the way. So here's a timeline. This is how you do the interview. Essentially, you go back to their first thought. Tell me about the first time you thought about donating money to the hospital. Oh yeah, okay, that's interesting. Tell me about the next time. Like, what was the next time? Now, you obviously didn't make the donation right when you thought of it. Tell me about the next time. Oh, interesting. Now, so now you're kind of now we know that they're engaging with the question of, do I want to give money to this hospital or that hospital, or do I want to give money at all? Do I see myself as a donor? Is my $20 even going to make a difference? And then tell me about the moment that you finally went to the site and you clicked donate. What was that like? What were you thinking of that day? Who were you talking to? What else were you doing that day? What time of day did you do it? Tell me. And now that you've done it, tell me, how's it working for you? What's your experience with it? This timeline can give you more insight. And again, this is with existing clients or existing customers or existing constituents. Going through this timeline interview actually can give you a great deal of insight into what was stopping them after events 1 and 2, and then ultimately what got them to finally engage with it. And it can give you insights not only into the social experience of being a donor, but the functional, maybe it was a tax write-off, and the emotional of it. You know, it just made me feel so good to give back because, you know, I was healed at that hospital. I will never forget the way that the doctors and nurses and staff made me feel like I could be healthy again. So, oh, this is another version of that timeline, which again, it's just a more linear path, which I actually think is not accurate. These timelines are very circuitous. So the second tool to work through is called competing pressures. And this focuses on what is actually stopping people from doing the thing that you hope they might do, whether it's being a donor, joining a thing, becoming a member, or if you're in the social impact world, you know, engaging in the solution that will help them live better lives or solve the social ill in their community or give greater access or create greater equity and justice in the world. Whatever the behavior is, this tool helps you understand a little bit about the pressures on people's lives and about what's stopping them. So this is Matt Waller, Chief Behavioral Officer at Clover Health, friend of mine. The great book that he's writing called Start at the End, How to Build Products That Create Change. And he talks a lot, he's also a behavioral psychologist, and his sort of insight into the world is about really understanding, again, how people live their lives, what's going on for them psychologically and emotionally, that drives them to do what they do. I'm going to skip the M&M's example, but I will. It's the first one that he taught me, and instead I'm going to go to this Good Samaritan study. So there was again, this theory is about understanding what's stopping people from making the choice you want them to make, you want to encourage them to make, or exhibiting the behavior or doing the thing that you want them to do. There was a study done on a seminary campus. So these are with divinity students in 1973. And the divinity students were given a pre-study questionnaire. And the questionnaire essentially asked a number of questions about how religious are you? And they answered all the questions. I'm really religious, I'm this, I'm pious, I'm that, whatever. Then the second variable was they were told to give a sermon, that today you have to deliver a sermon. And one group was told you're gonna deliver a sermon about the different types of ministry that clergy can have in the world. And the other set of sermon, you were going to write a sermon and deliver a sermon about the Good Samaritan story. So for those in the audience who don't know the Good Samaritan story, the short version of it is there's somebody on the side of the road, you can see in this picture, who is ailing, who is hurting, and the Good Samaritan is the one that stops to help the person after multiple people walk past him. That's the Good Samaritan story. And so they were given one of those two sermons. And then the third variable was how timely they were. They were told they have to get from building A to building B. And building B was where they're going to deliver this sermon. It was so important that they get there on time. And some group of the seminary students, some were told, you're a little bit late, so just hurry from point A to point B. Another group was told, you're on time, just take a walk, no rush, you'll get there, point A to point B. And the third was, you are unhurried, so you can take as much time, really, you just take your time, don't worry about it, to go from building A to building B. And along the way, between building A and building B, these, I think, very cruel study designers, Darley and Batson, had hired an actor who was on the ground between two buildings, pretending to have a broken leg and screaming out in pain and begging for help. Please, someone help me. This is on a seminary campus. Please, someone help me. And every one of these, the participants, the students, passed by this person on the way from building A to building B. And what they were trying to find out is, are people likely to do the thing that we hope that seminary students and future clergy would do, which is to stop and help the person? And as it turns out, of these three variables, self-described religiosity had no impact whatsoever. The people who said, I am extremely pious, the people who said, I'm not really that pious, I'm kind of secular, didn't matter at all, didn't impact who stopped and who didn't. The type of sermon that they gave, like literally there were people who gave a sermon about the Good Samaritan story, and still 47% of them walked right past this person who's on the ground in the exact same circumstance as the Good Samaritan story. What was the variable that mattered most? Timeliness. That only 10% of the students who were told that they are in a rush actually stopped to help this person. Let me just reframe that. 10% of people who had committed their lives to becoming clergy in light of their faith and to lead communities built on justice and serving the world and helping others who are in need, who are in dire need, only 10% of them who thought they were in a rush actually stopped. So what does this teach us about what we should be teaching in, oh, and by the way, the other numbers, 63% who were told you are not in a rush did stop. So 63% versus 10%. That's a huge, that was the most significant variable, of course. And what does that tell you about what's the most important thing we should be teaching in seminaries? It's not about what the right thing to do and moral code and ethics and scripture study and all those things. It's about time management, right? If we actually want people to do the right thing, to stop when this person is on the side of the road begging for help, that we just need to teach people how to get there on time and how to manage their time better. So the reason why this story is so valuable in light of this idea of competing pressures is that if we can understand what are the things stopping people from actualizing the behavior that we hope that they will actualize. And again, becoming a donor, becoming a member, becoming a teacher at your charter school, engaging in your network. If we can better understand what are the things that are stopping them, and these are usually not things that you would assume, right? If you saw somebody in the street walk right past a person who was begging for help, you wouldn't think to yourself, geez, that person needs better time management skills. No, you'd probably think, what a mean person. They just walked right past that needy person. So the more that we can actually understand what's going on in people's lives that is stopping them from engaging in the behavior, the better we can invite them to walk that path with us. So the two key questions when you're writing behavioral statement are, one, what are the behaviors that I most want to promote? And two, what are the inhibiting pressures that I might remove to make that path easier to walk? Here's an example of a behavioral statement, and this is Uber's. Maybe not the best example when we're talking about ethical behavior, but these are the three parts of a behavior. Actually, let me go back. The three parts of a behavioral statement. One is the originating need. What is it that arises in someone's life such that they might choose to engage with the thing you're doing at your nonprofit? Two, what are the limitations? And these tend to be binary. What are the limitations on their life that would stop people, that immediately might exclude people from engaging in the thing? So a perfect example of a limitation is the people in the YANA network. You probably can't be part of YANA if you didn't go to Yale. Rachel, is that right? Oh, I'm wrong. Okay, see, I made an assumption. Look at that. But a limitation is something that's binary. That is, you're either in or you're out, and that's okay. You also have to know if you're selling something or inviting people into a certain experience, it is perfectly okay to have limitations on who you're serving and how you're serving. And the third is, what's the target behavior that you want them to do? So the Uber statement is, when people want to go from point A to point B, they will take an Uber if they have a smartphone. That's a limitation. If you don't have a smartphone, you can't take an Uber. They have to have a credit card. Even though 20% of America is not engaged with a formal banking institution, they have to have a credit card, and connectivity. Uber can measure this with rides per month. That's the impact. Now, with your work, once you better understand those inhibiting pressures, not only can you seek to remove them, but if you do it well enough, you can actually work to turn those inhibiting pressures into a promoting pressure, something that invites people into it. A perfect example of that is, think about the Snickers bar. The number one reason why people would not want to buy a Snickers bar, the inhibiting pressure, is it's highly caloric. And if you look at the way that they've marketed Snickers over the last few years, they have actually, it's the Hungry Why Wait campaign, that when you're hungry, you're not you. But once you've had a Snickers bar, in other words, once you've had those calories, you will become yourself again. That the peanuts are somehow like a saving grace health ingredient for the Snickers bar. So I know we joke about, like, wow, okay, so they kind of tricked everybody, and it's true. But they turned that inhibiting pressure into a promoting pressure. It was a reason, like a meal replacement bar was a reason to actually buy the Snickers, as opposed to a reason not to buy it. So when we think about the work we do, that's a really important lens. The last element that I want to introduce, and I'm going to do this briefly, is about bright spots. And there's actually a pastor who I'm working with who has used this tool beautifully and brilliantly. And this is about following the rule breakers. So there's a story, Monique and Jerry Sternin, back in 1990, they were hired by Save the Children to go to Vietnam and try to work with the local communities there to address the widespread malnutrition crisis. It was beyond crisis at that point. And there had been so many well-meaning humanitarian organizations that had gone there over the years and poured millions of dollars trying to figure out how to solve for malnutrition in a place with such intertwined and interconnected systems, all of which were contributing to the problems. And these were the last people invited by the Vietnamese foreign minister. In fact, he said, I only want to give you 6 months. And if after 6 months you haven't figured it out, we're really done with the interventions from all these humanitarian organizations, right? We don't want any more help. So the Sternins came in, and they knew they weren't going to solve for the poor sanitation. That was a systemic issue. For the poverty, that was a systemic issue. For the lack of education, that was a systemic issue. So instead, rather than looking at the problems, they went to the villages, and the Sternins asked a very simple question. They met with the foremost experts on the way that people live their lives, which was the mothers in all of the families in the villages. And by the way, important note is that no matter how high up you are in your organization, you're not the expert on the people you're trying to serve. They are. They're the expert on how they live their lives. And the more that you can listen to them and understand how they live their lives, the better you're going to be able to serve them. So the Sternins went to these experts, the mothers, and they said, now it's clear there's malnutrition across the board in your community here in the village, but are there any families in your village that have healthy, bigger children? Is there anyone that is not succumbing to this trend across the board of malnutrition? And the mother said, yes, 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 let me bring you to them. So the Sternins started to ask a lot of questions about what was different. How is it possible that if everyone in this community, all the children are experiencing malnutrition and they're all under the same context, how is it possible that these people are deviating from the norm? We call them positive deviants. Well, it turned out what they found in the first village that they visited is that these mothers were serving their children smaller portions of food, but more often throughout the day. instead of the cultural norm, which was to have a very, most of the food was consumed at the lunch meal. The second is that they would get the brine shrimp that otherwise were considered, they had a very low class stigma. People wouldn't really eat them because they were considered like insects. And the sweet potato greens, which were usually discarded, and only the sweet potatoes were eaten. And they would incorporate the shrimp and the sweet potato and the greens into the soup and stews that they made. And the third is they would ladle from the bottom instead of from the top of the soup. Seems like really, really simple differences, but somehow these mothers, by going against what some of the cultural norms were, in the same context, in the same settings, with all the same variables as all of the other mothers whose children were experiencing malnutrition, their children were thriving. So the Sternans then they took that same lens to go to finding the people who are the bright spots with regard to malnutrition. And they went to hundreds of villages all throughout Vietnam. And they found that each village had slightly different tweaks, slightly different differences for the bright spot children and bright spot families. And rather than they themselves building a whole infrastructure and organization to educate all of the folks, the communities, they actually invited the mothers who themselves had come up with these solutions to become the educators and the teachers and the evangelists. And after 6 months, 65% of the kids in the villages where the Sternans worked, 65% of them were no longer experiencing malnutrition. 65%. And within 2 years, I think they had, the number was up to about 90+%. And that was, again, not by going to where the problem areas are, but by finding the bright spots amidst where you're seeing the rest of the negative trends. So one thing to do here is you look for rebels with a cause, or anomalies. And the story of the pastor, and then I'm going to stop. The story of the pastor that I want to share is a person who's actually in our Columbia Business School fellowship right now called START. And she works with, her mission in life actually is to break the cycle of human trafficking. And what she observed, and this is only by going to try to understand who are the people who are in the system or, caught up in human trafficking, who are the ones who are making their way out, while so many of their peers and other folks who are also caught up in the same, literally in the same trafficking rings, who get roped back in. And so what this pastor, Q English, what she was able to discover was actually the ones who were able to get out of these trafficking rings were arrested. They were, all of the folks who she studied had been arrested, had gone through the system, had gone to an emergency shelter. And the ones who were able to avoid and resist sort of getting drawn back in were the ones who went to emergency shelters that were at least 25 miles away from where they were arrested. So how is that possible? What's the difference? It turns out that for the folks who were the workers who were getting arrested and being brought to emergency shelters that were within that radius of the trafficking ring, that the traffickers had actually intentionally gotten people arrested and placed them into the shelters to recruit women back out into the trafficking rings. And the police didn't know about this, and the prison system didn't know about this, and no one was aware that that was the single most important variable, was the distance, how far away from their setting they were brought into emergency shelter. And by finding out that the people who were avoiding that fate and getting back on their feet and out of the trafficking circle, that it was that one single variable, that they were taking to shelters that were a little further away. And so her work now in breaking the cycle of human trafficking is based on that concept, that we need to build beds for women that are further and further away from their initial trafficking circle in order to avoid that same fate. And so I'll leave these last slides. But I think one of the most important things with the bright spots methodology, when you're looking at your organization and your constituents, is we tend to focus so much on where the erosion is happening and where the failures are happening. And we want to do pre-mortems on the failure and post-mortems on the failure. And we sit with the failure. I mean, failure is when in Silicon Valley, they have failure conferences where people celebrate failure and they fetishize failure. And it's human nature to go to where things aren't working. With bright spots, actually, the focus is on finding the places where they are working, and then building on those strengths and extrapolating, not only doubling down where they're working and why they're working, but then taking what's different, taking that anomaly and better unpacking it so that you can then take that and apply it to other parts of your organization and other constituencies. And you end up evangelizing the bright spots instead of constantly unpacking the failures. It also leads to organizational change, which I think is critically important. It's also, I think for grant making, this is incredibly important. Using the bright spots methodology is incredibly important. Okay, I am done. We're at the Q&A. I am late and I take full responsibility for that, but I am gonna stop the screen share. Okay, and now I wanna hear from people. A lot of hands raised, okay.
Let's see, chat. Q&A. Not yet.
Okay, I see.
Yeah, can you display that last slide or you just cruise through?
Oh, sure, yeah. And actually this person also asked earlier, what was the revenue of the religious industry? So the World Economic Forum estimated it at $1.2 trillion, third largest industry in America. That's a conservative estimate. The less conservative estimate is $4.8 trillion, which would be the largest industry. The real estate holdings of religion in the world are the religion is the largest real estate holder in the world. In fact, the Catholic Church has more real estate than the entire country of France, 10% larger than the entire country of France. Okay, last slide.
And just so everyone knows, for those who are YANA paid members, we will be able to send you the slides. For everyone else, when we send around the link to the video, you can stop and pause as you wish. And those are all open on the YouTube website. Let's see, what other Q&A do we have?
Great. So here's the last slide, just so, and if you want to take a screenshot or anything, it's right there.
And I know throughout you talked about some very good resources, and thank you for sharing those. And the book that's coming out by your colleague.
Oh, it's called Start at the End by Matt Wallert. It's I think it's about creating something for social change, or designing products that create change, something along those lines.
And that'll be coming out this summer.
June 2019. Yeah.
Okay.
Matt Wallert also developed, again, he's a behavioral psychologist. He also developed something, I think it's called getmearaise.com. Maybe somebody can look into this. But when he was looking at sort of the pay gap, the growing pay gap across gender in the US, I think it's 77 cents to $1. He was beginning to look at what are the things, what are the sort of behavioral elements that are creating inhibiting pressures. Now, of course, there's cultural issues at play. There's the way that people are socialized to believe how they're supposed to take initiative or not take initiative. There's a lot of toxicity and systemic issues at play. But one thing he noticed was that it's actually the language of asking for a raise that is an inhibiting pressure, figuring out how to articulate, I want a raise. And so he developed something, it is a form letter that you fill out your information and print it out, and you can put it on the desk of your supervisor when asking for a raise. And I don't know the number to date, but it's somewhere around $7 billion in raises for women as a result of getmearaise.com. And that's Matt Wallert. I think it's Get Me a Raise, or getraised.com. I think that's what it is.
Okay.
Yeah, anyway, Matt's brilliant, and I love him. He's incredible.
If you could maybe talk a little about the competing aspects, what have you found or seen as to why people might show up for religious service or not, or show up to a meeting or join a particular organization or not? Is it a time issue? Is it an interest? Any kind of general trends?
I'm sorry, I actually just saw a pop-up question that was this is great. You are giving us examples that are borderline quote bad for people. Absolutely, I'm giving examples from Snickers and that milkshakes. Right, that's absolutely fair. It's about I don't know that it's about tricking them. I actually think it's about re-articulating and serving their needs. Actually the Snickers one I think is totally fair. That it's about turning that high caloric thing into something that's enticing. I think that's 100% fair. You tricked the seminarians. Oh, the seminarian. Oh, so to be clear, I didn't run that study. It was done in 1973. There were two social scientists who were trying to understand what was preventing people from embracing the values that they themselves actually held near and dear, right? That we yearn to be more charitable than we actually are. We yearn to volunteer more time than we actually do. There is a path that we hope to walk, but we don't always walk that path, whether it's in our personal lives, in our families. We want to be more patient. We want to be more loving. We want to create a more just world. But on an everyday basis, there's an understanding that there are certain things that either we our own way or other things that are getting in the way of allowing us to really live into those ideals and values. So yes, that's, no, I did not do the seminary study. Can you discuss the timeline to satisfaction further? Do you have guidance on fundraising for social entrepreneurship where lots of people being asked for financial contributions are also volunteering? Yeah, going back to the jobs to be done timeline, the timeline to satisfaction, it can be years long. So one of the things that I've done just in my spare time is try to understand why people become clergy. And for a lot of folk, the first time they thought about becoming a clergy person, it might have been 15 years before they actually choose to go to seminary. There are many people I know who are second career and third career seminarians who become clergy. So the timeline can actually be really, really, really long. And the work of interviewing them around the jobs to be done is to try to understand what was holding them back along the way. Why did it take that many years for them to finally decide now is the time and I'm going to do it? So I think to do those interviews, again, it takes about 45 minutes. You want to find people who are served, who are fulfilled by what it is that you're trying to do, who are satisfied, the happy customers, and spend about 45 minutes trying to understand that timeline. After what got them to have the first thought? And then why did they say, no, it's not for me? What got them to have the second thought? And then got them to say, yeah, maybe, but not now or not me. And then the third thought is usually when they start doing their back and forth and they're weighing the pros and cons. What were they weighing at that point? What were the other possibilities? So a lot of seminarians I speak to, I was going to be a human rights lawyer. But I don't know, all the lawyers I know said, don't become a lawyer. It's not that great. Sorry, Rachel. No, I mean, I think to understand what it is that they're engaging with as they're making the decisions, I think is really important because then it tells you who you're in competition with or what business you're in, whether you're fundraising or you're selling a product or you're trying to create social change. And then guidance on fundraising for social entrepreneurship, where lots of people being asked for financial contributions are also volunteering. I think that's totally fair. In the work of social entrepreneurship, the hardest thing to be able to do is demonstrate value, is to actually prove that you're having impact. And all too often in the work of social entrepreneurship, we rely on what I call vanity metrics. Those are things that, oh, but I had 1,000 clicks on the website. Great. How many of those 1,000 people went out and made change in the world or did, or gave a donation or, but we had 50 people come to our event the other day. Okay, well, what was the experience? What did you learn about them? What did they learn about themselves? How were they going to be changed to go seek, to make impact in the world? There's a lot of resources on finding good metrics and measurements. You should go to Ashoka for that, Echoing Green for that. There's a great book called Measure What Matters that came out recently. There's an organization called the Transformational Index. If your focus is more on the personal transformation or spiritual transformation that people might go through as part of your project. But I think being able to tell a better story about success, about what it looks like. And then the other around fundraising is a concept called the hero's journey that I really believe in. It's a book by Donald Miller called Story Brand. But the idea of a hero's journey is about putting the people you seek to serve, putting them at the center of your world and making them the heroes of the story. So, you know, this pastor who developed this strategy around human trafficking, she could be out there talking all about her and how she had the revelation and how she figured this thing out. And she's brilliant. I mean, she's really brilliant. She's dedicated her life to this thing, but you won't hear her tell that story once, because you'll hear her tell the story about the heroes who are the ones who got out of the human trafficking cycle and are now living lives where they are independent and they are very far removed from that toxic cycle. And that's the hero. So I think when fundraising around social entrepreneurship is make sure you're telling the story of the people you're serving as the hero and not the organization. It's a very hard thing to do.
Just to follow, can you just repeat the name of the book? Is it called Story Brand, and it's by Donald Miller?
Yes, Story Brand, Donald Miller. Great. It's a great resource.
Okay. There's another question that came in is someone asked whether doing that interview is, how does that work maybe with board members? Potential board members, current board members, have you seen that come into play?
Yes, I would actually start the interview for existing board members first and trying to understand why they joined the board, what they were hoping to experience. And I think you'll get a pretty nuanced set of feedback on that, you know, different stories that got them, but then look for patterns. If you've got 15 people on your board, start to look for patterns. What are the narratives that were similar across those board members? And I think an important note here is pick the board members who you want to replicate, right? Pick the ones who are doing great work and
the bright stars
and are really the bright stars, and then understand do the timelines with them. Because, you know, many of us who work in the nonprofit space have had board members who are disruptive. And by the way, disruption is actually an okay thing, but ones who come to the board meeting and just want to hear themselves talk, or they ask the same questions. They're not productive. They're critical. They sort of bring a lot of negativity into the culture. And so you want to focus on who are the real positive ones who have contributed quite a bit of their time and their talent and their treasure, and then build on those.
And the follow-up to that, is there a template for the kind of questions you ask people during these interviews?
There's a good podcast. I think it's the Jobs to Be Done. I think they have a number of recordings on these. There's a good example. There is not one for social enterprise, and I think that's an opportunity for sure. So very often when we talk about jobs to be done, it's in reference to products. And that can, I mean, to be totally honest, when we take these ideas from the, you know, quote unquote business world and apply them into the work of social impact, it can feel like it's cheap. You know, when I tell a story about Snickers, but we're really talking about like saving lives out there and making meaning and building community, it's really difficult, right? It's a tough translation. But I will say I did those jobs to be done interviews with a number of different sets of constituents. And it really just starts with like, tell me about the first time you thought about this. What was that like? Was it, you know, what was going on in your life around that time? How did you hear about it? Who did you hear it from? Do you trust that person? Do you not? Those are some of the sets of questions that you want to ask, and then sort of walk them through that timeline. But there's not necessarily a script. Although if you Google jobs to be done script, you can definitely find stuff out there. Okay.
I think we're actually at the end of our time. Last question is people want to know how they can reach you. What's the best place to reach you?
Elan, ELAN at CLAL.org. Okay. And I'm looking. Yeah, here we go. So there was a response about get me a raise was not. Oh, can I put into this? Here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wait, where was it?
I think it was a...
Yuval Rector is the founder of Get Me a Raise. Yes, it's called getraised.com, and you'll see Matt Wallert there right on the, he worked on it with Abi Karnani in 2010.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Elan, thank you very much. I think it gave a lot of us a lot to think about, including, you know, how we recruit members and the messages we put out. And hopefully, and it's interesting to know that we don't have a good template that's really suited for the social enterprise. So clearly more work to be done, even in translating some of these private sector business tools to some of the social innovation work. So thank you for what you do. Really terrific presentation, and I'm sure we'll be in touch, and thanks for sharing your time with us. So thank you, everyone. For those, spread the word. We'll have this up in a little while. We'll share the video shortly, and just give us an email if you're a paid member and you want to copy the slides separately. Please spread the word about YANA. You absolutely do not need to be a member. We are open to friends, family, anyone who is interested in the kind of work we do with networking and sharing best practices. We appreciate you spending your hour with us. So have a great rest of the week. Thank you.